One day he comes to me and he says, "Are you sure there's nothing I can do for us to stay together?" And I said, "No, I've made my mind up. It's done." The next day was my 40th birthday, and I found out he got with a 21-year-old.
Hello, and welcome to the Big 4-0 podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie McLaughlin. In our 20s and 30s, we spend so much time and energy striving for success and checking all the boxes, but it's usually according to some outside authorities' standards or approval. Then, in the years around age 40, many of us start to redefine who we are, what success means, and what we want out of life. We learn to have more confidence in our own authority and expertise, and our life adjusts accordingly. Or we ignore it all and deal with the repercussions of not evolving. It's not always a smooth process. I fought against the transition, which made getting through it a messier process than it had to be. On this podcast, I welcome you to tap into my stories and experience, as well as those of my guests, to help you make your way through your own transition, and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes we made along the way. Today, my guest is Elizabeth Makepeace, who left a marriage that wasn't working just before she turned 40. Her husband was much younger than her, and after pursuing her and wooing her, changed completely when they got married. As a healer, she was trying to heal him, but she finally realized that wasn't her job. He had the choice to heal or not, and he had made it. Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome to the show.
Oh, it's so lovely to be here, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. I feel like you and I have taken a bit of time to actually get scheduled, so I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. You have a Jekyll and Hyde almost as part of your transition. So why don't we start by tell me a little bit about the forces that shaped you into who you were when our story begins in your mid-30s. How did you get to be that person?
So mid-30s, I was, single mum. I had all my stuff together. I was doing really well in my business. I was a remedial massage therapist and an energy healer, and lived in the beautiful tropics of far north Queensland, really healthy and all the things, great kids. And yeah, I think it was mid to late 30s that I met this beautiful man. And, he was drop dead gorgeous. He was a musician, so he
Yeah.
played guitar and drums, and he was a backpacker, so he was traveling, and he just seemed to be this, eclectic type, beautiful, creative being,
Yeah.
and shone this light and all the things. And he just drew me in. And he was actually younger than me.
Right.
And so at first I was really not interested. He was doing everything he possibly could to lure me in, and he
Yeah.
did a really good job.
Yeah.
And yeah, we got together. Everything was fine to start with, but then things started to shift.
What was the courtship like? Because he was younger than you and you had young children, and he was that sort of breezy, artistic guy. So how was it that he drew you in? Because the age difference, if I remember correctly, is like 12 years, right?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah. So quite a
absolutely.
bit.
It is. And my thing is, as a spiritual energy healer, I was already on a journey and had this dream that I was going to meet this guy. And also through the healings that I was doing, we also had the experience. There was me and a little mini group that I was in. We were all doing
Mhm.
past life regression
Yep.
and it had been sort of predestined that I was going to meet someone and have a child. And so I met him through one of the group, like this woman and her daughter who had been traveling and met him through the travels. So the
Okay.
courtship was the first thing. I met him exactly like my dream from
Mm.
3 to 4 years ago.
Yeah.
The only difference was that I had said in the dream, "Oh, here he comes now." And in reality, my friend Jolene had said it to me because they wanted me to meet this guy, Toby, and
Yep.
everyone was sort of talking about how amazing he is and da da da. And I kept on missing getting the opportunity to talk to him. And then the day that I met him, it was exactly like this dream.
Mm.
So he started finding out what sort of music I was into and playing that sort of music and, just making little remarks and feeding my ego. That's what he was doing. He was
Okay.
feeding my ego.
Yeah.
And we seemed to have a lot in common. Already, everyone had been talking about how good he was.
Right.
So, you trust your friends and all the things.
Yeah.
But then he also was really good with my kids.
That was my next question. Yeah.
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 He was really good with my kids. There's some great photos. He was showing my son how to play guitar. He was playing soccer with him and he got on really well in the family.
Mm-hmm.
So, he ticked all the boxes, right?
Yeah. So how long did you guys date?
We dated for, I think it was maybe 2 years. What happened was I went over to Germany. He was German,
Mm-hmm.
and I went over to Germany with him and met his family.
Yeah.
And that was beautiful. Got to meet all his family, and they loved me and took me on board and all the things. And he met my family, and then when we got back, I came back before him. I think it was a week later, his mother suddenly passed.
Oh.
Yeah, and so there was a bit of trauma, and then next thing I know, I'm pregnant.
Oh.
So it was like just one thing after the other.
Yeah.
And, through that process, I actually lost the baby. I found out I had a 15 centimeter fibroid, and it was a
Mm.
huge journey to go through that. It was actually quite an interesting journey because I was able to clear it and release it by myself. But I lost Sarah at 20 weeks.
I'm
And
so
I think,
sorry.
yeah, and I think that, from a spiritual point of view, it was very sad and traumatic and all the things, but really when she came out, the very first thing that came out of my head was, "This is all meant to be." It just
Mm.
felt at peace, really. It was quite an interesting process. I had the experience of really connecting with my mum because my mum had lost a baby before me,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'd had this realization of the trauma that she went through, and so it helped me bond with her a little bit more.
Interesting.
Yeah, which was beautiful. But what happened was we then, decided, well, this has happened and this has happened. We knew we were going to get married. Why
Yeah.
don't we finish the year off by getting married? And so we got married.
And you were what, 35 then?
I think, yeah,
Yeah.
35, 36. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so it was a challenging year. He lost his mom, he lost the baby, but then you decide to finish the year out with something joyous by becoming a family. Then what?
Well, this is where it gets really sticky, right?
Yeah.
Because it was like a light switch went off. All of
Mm.
a sudden, he just completely changed. And it was like he was Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah.
It was like he had a definition of what marriage was supposed to be. And all of a sudden, he changed the way he was behaving and what he wanted me and my children to do and our roles and our behaviors and all of those things. Yeah, all of a sudden, I had to cook and clean and make sure everything was good and the kids had done their homework and that they were doing work in the house and all the things. And it got to this point where the kids didn't want to come out of their bedroom because he just kept on hassling them. You need to do this, you need to do that, and you haven't done this, and blah, blah, blah. And it got to the point, never had anxiety before in my life.
Mm.
And I had quite a few friends that were psychologists.
Mm-hmm.
There was 3 of them. One of them handed me this piece of paper that had the domestic abuse cycle on it. I
Yeah.
went, that does look a little bit familiar.
Oh, yeah.
And then another one said to me, "Do you think that maybe he's got Asperger's?" And I'm like, "Well, what's that? And what does that look like? And, what are the symptoms?" And she's sharing, and I'm going, "Yep, yep. Oh my God, yep." Oh,
What was that
no.
word you just said? What did he have?
Asperger's. These days it's called
Oh,
high functioning autism, but back
okay.
then,
Okay,
yeah,
I would have pronounced it Asperger's. Okay, I just want
Asperger's. Yeah,
to.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
fair enough.
Sorry.
Yep.
Yep.
No, it's just two
Just
two countries separated by a
language.
common language, right? I
Yes,
just
yeah,
wanted to make
absolutely.
sure that I was hearing you the right way. Okay, so your friend thought that he might have a version of an autistic, a functioning
Yes.
autistic. Okay,
Yeah.
and you
And
thought that felt
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. It like started ticking the boxes and I'm like,
yeah.
how did I miss that? And what I came to was that because there was a little bit of a language barrier,
Mm-hmm.
and he was also had that sort of musical.
Right.
He was very, very focused on his music and an absolute talent, absolutely amazing on the guitar, had
Yeah.
already created a couple of CDs. He was, a bit eccentric when it came to all of that. So I missed it because of that, you
Right.
know?
Right. Let me go back to one thing. When you talked about him being very rigid about the house having to run a certain way and you needing to have dinner on the table when he got home and cleaning and the kids had their chores and they had to do their homework, was he also playing a role in that, or was he doing his quote unquote part in the household, or was he just dictating what everybody else should be doing?
No, he was doing his role.
Okay.
We had a bit of a joke between me and the kids because they'd come in from school and they say, "Who's making dinner tonight?" And if I said Toby, their face would drop, because they knew that it meant it was either a rice dish or a noodle dish, and the difference was one had rice and one had noodles. The whole process was quite interesting because I'd separated from the father of my kids 10 years prior.
Yeah.
So I'd been by myself looking after me and the kids and really sorting myself out and
Yeah.
working on myself personally and all the things. And so when this all started happening, I didn't pick it up as there's something wrong here with him or with the relationship. I was in that place of self reflection and is there something wrong with me
Right.
that I can't hold a relationship? Why is this happening again?
Yeah.
I'd been in an emotionally abusive relationship in my youth with the
Mm.
father of my kids.
Mm.
And I'm like, I've done all the work. I've done the spiritual stuff. I'm in a
Yeah.
really good space. How did this happen again?
Yeah. How did it happen
So
again? Did you ever figure that out?
I got to this point where I was starting to have panic attacks,
Yeah.
like freaking out, like, oh, I've got to get home and we haven't done this and we haven't done that before he gets home from work.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed and I stayed and I stayed, even though it was detrimental to me and my kids. And
Yeah.
I was like, I've got to work out what's going on here
Yeah.
because I don't want to create it in my next relationship. What happened was my daughter left home. She moved like an hour and a half away with her dad. And so it was a really sticky, horrible time. I'm
Yeah.
53 now, but back then it was crazy. So what happened was I took her to this healing weekend. It was a Mayan abdominal self-care massage.
Mm-hmm.
And we were learning how to do massage on our stomach. And through that process, I had this healing on my womb where I realized that as a healer, I was trying to heal everyone. When I realized that's what was going on and that everyone has the opportunity to heal themselves, and who am I to think that I have the right to heal everyone?
Right.
Like that's a bit egotistical and, not everyone's up for healing, right?
Yes.
When I realized what was going on, I literally went home and the next day I told him and I said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm not interested in being with you the way you are, and you're not interested in changing. And I respect that now.
Right.
Respect him for being whoever he wants to be, but just not in my space.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's a
So,
that's a tough place to come to. So
mm,
many of us, because I know I have done it as well, and from a little bit of a different angle, but you're talking about healing someone from a healer perspective, and from a more layperson perspective, it's like, I want to fix you. Or my version of it was, I want to love you so much that you'll fix yourself. So that's a really wild place to come to, of respect for, you are who you are, and that's fine. It's just no good for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I realized, as a healer, you go, where is the root cause of this?
Yeah.
I had grown up with parents where my dad was sick on a kidney machine. He got sick before I remember him being healthy. I was like 2 or 3 when he got
Yeah.
sick, and he died when I was 15.
Oh, wow.
So I had actually spent my whole life, I mean, I've got a photo of me at 12 years old putting all the tubes together and putting the saline in and, getting the bubbles out
Yeah.
of his dialysis machine.
Yeah.
And my mum was never home. She was working to keep the family going.
Right.
And so, us women in our family generationally looked after our family. And
Right.
so I looked at, well, the father of my kids, he was an alcoholic. And so I was looking after him.
Yep.
And here I was creating the same pattern again.
Yeah. Hi, we'll get back to the conversation in just a minute. We are about halfway through this examination of midlife transition. And this podcast is about your midlife journey as much as it is about mine and Elizabeth's. So let's make this conversation go both ways. I would love to hear your thoughts or your own transition stories. What have you run across? How are you managing the onset of what I call the ick? And what do you wish you knew about making your way through this transition? Drop me a message on my website, thebig40.com, and spell out all those words. There's no numbers in there. I'll put the contact details in the show notes as well. All right, back to the show.
So I cleaned up a lot of other stuff. I'd gone from being very shy and submissive and doing whatever I was told in the previous relationship to being a strong, empowered woman.
Right.
And then went, how did this happen?
Right.
Here's this little tweak.
Right. Here's a little piece I forgot to clean up, or I didn't know I had to clean up.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's so frustrating to have done all of that work and to have seen so many changes in yourself and to have known that you've evolved and really, stepped into yourself, and then to trip and fall back into a pattern that you didn't even know was there. That's so frustrating.
It's very interesting because we all think that we're going to get somewhere at the end.
Yeah.
And it's not true. We are always going to trip.
Yep. Right.
It's just the way life is. And from an energetic and soul level, those trips are those parts of our soul that came to correct anything that's holding us back from truly expressing our higher self.
Yeah.
And, our potential. And as you go along, we're always working on the things that are here to correct our, our soul's discrepancies.
And those are the things that call for our attention, to be attended to go and look at those things. You left him, you were 40, right? So that was like right there at the milestone moment. You said, that's it, I'm done.
So that's a little bit of a story too, because what happened was, I think it was maybe 3 weeks later that I actually turned 40. So when we separated and he left, because it was my house, he left the house and he just kept on coming back and back and back.
Mm-hmm.
And, I can't believe we're doing this. And, what can I change? And I'll take you to Thailand. I don't know where that came from, but he wanted to take me on holidays and all these things, trying to get me back. And then this one day he comes to me and gets me to have a coffee with him. Are you sure that there's nothing I can do for us to stay together? And I said, no, I've made my mind up. It's done. The next day was my 40th birthday. And the next day I found out he got with a 21-year-old.
Oh, God.
And so then a whole different set of things comes up for me to
Yeah,
deal with. You can imagine that
I
was a bit of
can.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really challenging, like all of the
Well, now
women's
there's the
stuff.
ego, right? Yeah,
Oh,
now they're
big
like,
time.
here I am, I turned 40 and he traded me in for a 21-year-old. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the story as old as time.
And it was crazy too, because as I'd gone through this process with the fibroid and all the things that had gone on with that, I started painting this painting. And one of our dear friends who's now passed was an exceptional artist and musician. And actually, I met him through Toby, and he was helping me learn how to paint this amazing, healing tree that I was creating that had sort of come and sprung up from the process of losing Sarah and the fibroid. And so I was doing really well, but I didn't know what I was doing. It took me a whole year to paint that painting because I was like, I am not touching that again. I don't know what
Right.
I'm doing. And luckily, I had this beautiful 80-year-old man that just gently took me through the process and encouraged me. And he'd say, just bring it over and let me check. Oh, look how good you did this. And,
Yeah.
like he was just so beautiful. And he got me to put my, paintbrush back in paint again. And I was
Yeah.
able to finish that painting. But it was a very trying time.
Yeah. I'll bet. Because now you have left a marriage, you've realized that there's a pattern here with men that you're going through. You've done some amount of damage to your relationship with your daughter, who's moved with her
Out.
dad, who you've already said is, an emotionally abusive kind of person. So that can't be a great thing. So now you're 40 and have to work your way through all of this back into health and sort of steadiness on your 2 feet. How do you do that in addition to your painting?
It was a really challenging time. I moved out of that house. I separated everything. I had to rebuild my relationship with my kids
Yep.
and the trust because they felt that I had chosen Toby over them, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
And I had to pick my feet up, and I'm just trying to think how I got through it. Friends were really solid in my relationship with my community.
Yep.
And so that was really good. Whenever I felt challenged, I would go and speak to a friend. Another thing that I actually did was I don't know if you've ever heard of cranial sacral
I have. Yeah.
therapy. Yeah.
Yeah. I've had
So
that.
I went and had a cranial sacral session once a fortnight for about 3 months
Yep.
to realign my body with my emotions as
Mm-hmm.
my emotions were going through. I allowed myself to be emotional. I allowed myself to go through the process and my body to go through the process. And it was quite liberating because it took me a long time. And I actually decided that I didn't want to be with anyone again for a while.
Yeah.
However, because of that relationship and because of the layers that I had been able to clear and recognize, because as a spiritual being, you get to recognize that there's patterns of behavior, right? And that they
Yes.
stem from previous experiences, generally conditioning from your childhood, could be epigenetics, it could be generational, finding the same pattern going through your generations. And the whole process of letting go of all of that supported me to never create that relationship again.
Right.
So life became quite busy for me while I was up in far north Queensland. But long story short, I ended up needing to move back to Sydney and New South Wales, which is about halfway down on the Australian coast.
Okay.
And so I moved down there to look after my mum, who
Mm-hmm.
was not doing too well. Long story short, she ended up having a heart attack. I looked after her, and then she ended up being in a nursing home. And through that process, I was like, I don't feel like I want to go back up to far north Queensland, but I really love the tropics and the rainforest and the beach and all
Yep.
the waterfalls. And I found an area down here that was exactly like that: beaches, waterfalls, rainforest, all of the things.
Nice.
And one day, walking down the beach after a long day online, just before I made my dinner, I thought I'll just go and get my feet wet because I, lived close to the beach.
Yeah.
Only one on the beach, and this beautiful man walks past. We start chatting, and he lived in an adjacent street. We found out we both love taking photos of sunrises and sunsets, and he showed me some places that I hadn't been before, and because I was new to the area. And yeah, we're engaged, and my maiden name was Payne, Payne,
Yeah.
and his last name is Makepeace.
Right.
So I've never created that sort of relationship again. He is definitely completely opposite to both of those
Yeah.
other relationships that I had.
Yeah.
Mm.
But it was a matter of, and this is really the challenging part, is identifying the pattern and the source of the pattern. And that's why I love sharing these stories, because when you tell your story, it's so clear. You talk about the dad of your kids was an alcoholic and you had to take care of him, and your husband was a young man with very clear ideas of what the marriage should look like, right? He was
Yes.
beholden to should because he
Yes.
was so young, in addition to any of his other issues. But then all of a sudden you say, well, my dad was sick from before I even knew, right? And you took care of him. So it's so interesting to be able to not only identify the pattern, but then identify the source of the pattern. It
Mm.
makes perfect sense. Your mom had to scramble to work real hard to make sure that there was enough money to take care of the house, to take care of your dad, to put food on the table, all of it, right? And so you were left to take care of your dad, which
Mm.
created this pattern, this thought inside you that said, I have to take care of men.
Yes. And not just men, or like, because at 12 years old I was cooking and cleaning and
Yeah.
shopping and
Yeah.
all the things, and I didn't know my mum. It was actually in that era, that late 30s, early 40s,
Right.
that I actually recognized that mum wasn't there for me
Right.
because she had been thrown into a role. I've got two older brothers.
Yeah.
So, she married a healthy, strong man.
Right.
And so by the time I came along and here he is sick, I can imagine that that would have been very challenging for her. Oh, now I've
100%.
I've got
Yeah.
to look after and be the support of my dad was the house mum, right?
Yeah.
And so, but he was sick, so he couldn't do much. And
Right.
so there was a whole process of recognizing, the strength of the woman. Now I can heal all the damage I've had from my mum that I felt neglected. She
Yep.
was actually supporting and caring for me. I just didn't realize it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It didn't
And
feel like it
it
to
didn't
you
feel like it.
because it wasn't what you thought you wanted or needed, but she was on a different level. She was sort of on the executive level, and you were feeling like you weren't getting your
Mm,
emotional needs met.
Well, she was, I can imagine being thrown into that role. She
Yeah.
most probably was scrambling herself.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And
And
back in those days, because you and I are about the same age, right? You have older brothers, but it's not their job to
no.
take care.
I've got to tell you, it wasn't until I moved back down, just, what, I think it's 10 years now since I've been here in New South Wales. When I first moved down and started looking after mum, it dawned on me that actually, because as soon as I walked in, again, straight into I've got to look after the family. Even my brothers went into that space, even though they had wives and their own lives. And it dawned on me, it's because I'm a woman. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that. I
Yeah.
didn't realize it was because I was a woman. That I used to make dinner for, I don't remember one of my brothers living at home. He left very early. But I used to make dinner for the family and take my brother his meal to him in his bedroom.
Yeah.
Didn't think anything of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so
Yeah.
it's very different these days.
Very
Yes.
different. Thank goodness. Thank
Mm.
goodness, right? There's a
Yeah.
little bit more balance there. But I really love how clearly you've told the story, because I think that people listening will be able to really use this example as we always have things that hang us up, right? And we when we finally are ready to see the patterns, you've just shared such a wonderful example of how to identify the pattern and then go and find the source of it.
Mm, mm,
Because really the knowledge of those things will set you most of the way free,
mm,
because once you're aware of them, then you can start making choices, or you can start working on whichever of the modalities is the most appealing to you
to
by way
you.
of healing or growth or personal development or therapy, whatever it may be. We all have our own path to that healing place, but the awareness is really the key door opening moment, I think.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
if I've got any advice for anyone listening, it's looking at the pattern. So,
Yep.
what's your most challenging relationship that you've got at the moment? And what's the pattern? Why is this person in your movie? Is one of the things I say to my clients.
Yep.
Why is this person in your movie?
What role are
And
they playing? Yeah.
yeah, what role are they playing? And is there a pattern with that person and other people in your life
Yeah.
that's holding you back from really shining brightly and really connecting to your highest potential?
Yeah. You're the best
It's an
expression of
important.
yourself. Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, Elizabeth, I love this story, and I thank you so much for sharing it. I love the end of the story, this peace that has come over your pain, this man that has made peace with your pain. It's
Yes.
such a beautiful way to end the story. And so I want to thank you for being so generous with your story today.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks so much for listening today. I have some thoughts about Elizabeth's story and how it fits into the framework of this midlife transition, but I am going to share those in a short bonus episode in a couple of days. I've been playing back and forth between including those thoughts here at the end of the interview and taking a few days to marinate, and I've been getting great feedback when I share these thoughts in a standalone episode, so I'm going to try to do that a little bit more often. All right. Next time, you are going to meet Jen Kakmar and Rose Planer, friends who both put their careers on hold to raise kids. Both their husbands were primary breadwinners, so they'd each dedicated more than 15 years to supporting their families, which left them feeling stagnant, isolated, and disheartened. And this is my first conversation with a couple of girlfriends who talk about how friendship and connection helped them make their way through their midlife transition. I'm so looking forward to sharing it with you. So I'll see you next time. The Big 4-0 podcast is produced and presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications.